Thanks, Danny. Food Tank friends, Arrell Food Institute friends, NPR friends, thank you so much. And it's really cool to be up here. So Bernie, Alice, thank you. I'm going to start on a somber note and then pivot to an uplifting note. And about 18 months ago, I had the very great privilege of being nominated by the Canadian government to sit on the high-level panel of experts on the Committee on World Food Security, which Sakuntala knows well. If that's not a word soup mouthful, only a big bureaucratic organization could call something that, eh? HLPE is what we sort of short form it, and its job is to provide advice to the United Nations on important topics. And we were asked earlier this year to write a very depressing briefing. What is the effect of conflict on food security and nutrition around the world? And it was specifically inspired is a terrible word to use, but I can't think of a better one, inspired by Gaza and Sudan, amongst other conflicts. So I found myself spending a lot of time this summer drafting text, reviewing evidence, and if you're interested, the HLPE's website has the briefing report. It's out now. One of the most depressing and draining tasks of my entire career. Among the many sad things I learned is the effect of famine and food insecurity last generations. If there is a pregnant woman in Gaza or Sudan experiencing food insecurity today, her grandchildren will be at elevated risks of catching infectious diseases. 2 generations. The reason I mention this is, of course, to remind us that the food system is failing far too many of our fellow people, but also as a preemptive call to action to everybody in this room. Food system leaders, if we don't get this right, we will be paying the consequences for a very long time. So that's the depressing part. I'm now going to pivot and try to talk about the art of the possible with 2 quick anecdotes, scene paintings. In the first scene, you have to imagine a nondescript industrial park on the outskirts of a nondescript rural community in the central part of British Columbia. The sun is high in the sky, the mountains are beautiful, there's a gorgeous lake in the bottom of the valley, the sun is glinting off of it. I really want to go swimming, but I'm there at the request of a serial entrepreneur to visit Canada, arguably North America's newest and possibly most sophisticated vertical farm. This is a box, hermetically sealed, that produces lettuce. One of the things that's interesting about this particular vertical farm, called Avery Farm, is that it does head lettuce. Most vertical farms in operation today produce microgreens or baby greens. So if anybody wants to geek out about lettuce tech, come talk to me. It's really cool. Did the tour. I was pretty impressed by the tech. This is a technology which I have spent a lot of time thinking critically about. And then we did something amazing. We had a lettuce tasting. I'd never thought of doing a lettuce tasting. Scotch, yes. Coffee, yes. Chocolate, absolutely. Maybe wine. Lettuce is just as good if you do it right. Like, it's amazing. We had all these different kinds of lettuce. We were filling out forms. Also, you dig under the surface. Their costs are coming down. It's not an expensive way of producing lettuce today. I didn't know that. Almost no land, almost no water, no pesticides. A nutritional profile that beats anything on the market on a side-by-side comparison of vitamins and minerals. And because British Columbia's electricity grid is fairly carbon neutral, not a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with that lettuce. Sustainable, affordable, nutritious, like what's not to like? So I asked Gary, the serial entrepreneur, about it. I mean, I've known Gary for years. He asked me to come out and provide some technical advice to their team. And in conversation, I discovered, and I've been curious about this for years, because he's been working on this project for about 4 years, which incidentally started selling lettuce into British Columbia last Sunday. So brand new story. Said Gary, I got up the courage to ask Gary how much it cost him to build this facility. And it was a $35 million capital expenditure. I was like, whoa, Gary, that's a lot of money. Why did you do that? Build a box to grow tasty leaves? And he said, well, Evan, I mean, 10-year ROI period, not a bad business investment. But then he kind of laughed and he said, well, to be honest, could have put the money elsewhere in the economy and worked way less and got way more. But then he said the real answer, and here he sort of looked up at the mountains and scratched his head a bit. So the real answer is about resilience and food system transformation. Said it's crazy that British Columbia imports all this lettuce from water-parched California. The quality of the product on the market is way less than I can do. And I don't think that if people like me don't invest in the food system, it's going to work for my generation, or my grandchildren's generation. I said, okay, Gary, thank you for your leadership. Anecdote number 2. Other side of the planet, last May, I found myself in Sierra Leone at the request or the invitation of the president of Sierra Leone, who has emerged in recent years as an extraordinary global champion of food systems transformation. And I was invited to provide some leadership and do some chairing of some meetings that was bringing Sierra Leone, Malawi, and Ethiopia civil society and government together to develop more resilient pathways to food system transformation. This was all part of an Irish Aid-funded project under the auspices of the Global Panel for Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, another great big mouthful. And before going to Sierra Leone, which I'd never been to before, I asked my friend Patrick, who works in the president's office and leads their climate and food security work. I said, Patrick, if I'm going to chair these meetings, which I'm very honored to do, I really would like to learn a little bit about your country before I start chairing these meetings. So could you arrange for me to get out into the countryside for a few days, drive up into the hills and whatnot? And so we did. We took a tour. And on the first day of the tour, we went away from the coast and up into the hills. And there I witnessed what probably should be called a post-apocalyptic landscape. Rampant deforestation for oil palm, ravages of climate change, landslides, incredible poverty and food insecurity, all against a backdrop of post-conflict because of Sierra Leone's terrible civil war, and not just the COVID, but also the Ebola crisis, which was more significant for Sierra Leone, significantly more significant for Sierra Leone than COVID was, for us, for instance. So, wow, this was a depressing moment. It was a horrific set of images. And remember, Sierra Leone is native chimpanzee habitat. So arguably this should be the most protected ecosystems on the planet, or terrestrial ecosystems on the planet. But I didn't end that first day anyways feeling depressed. It was forward-thinking, entrepreneurial, innovative, clear-eyed, energetic. Those are the feelings I took away from that against this very, very sobering backdrop. The next day, Patrick wanted me to see a couple of fish processing plants. And so we went down to the coast and drove along the road that goes along the shoreline, and it was much prettier, I'll be honest. And we stopped at a couple of fish processing plants. And the first one was quite small and humble looking, nothing more than a cluster of cinder block buildings with some charcoal fires and then racks of fish, drying and being smoked around it. This was right nestled within an incredibly chaotic, smelly, dirty, vibrant fish landing site. And even on a Sunday afternoon, it was hopping. There was just so much stuff going on. We then drove a couple of miles to a multi-million euro development investment. And you can probably predict where this story is going. It was walled off from the community. It was an enormous facility, and it was completely mothballed. There was a security guard, some burned out trucks, and a pack of stray dogs, and that was it. And of course, the story is one of mismanagement and rumors of corruption, but it's also one of scale and problem solving. The big facility required a lot of fish to run and keep going. But the fishers of Sierra Leone have small boats and small nets. And so the small facility that cost very little capex to build, well, it solved a problem and it built resilience. The problem was, what does a fisher do with a small harvest to add value and increase shelf life? And that small facility did it. Now, I don't want to treat the small facility with rose-colored glasses. There were problems, food safety problems, efficiency problems, lots of issues there. And it was solving a problem for the community. So what links these two stories, of course, is the idea of innovation and entrepreneurship to promote a more resilient food system transformation. And this is something that, in the Canadian context, my friends and I at the Arrell Food Institute, University of Guelph, got this name check in, thank you. The Arrell Food Institute, University of Guelph, have been doing a deep dive in over the last 18 months. We've tried to consult widely and read deeply about what it would take in the Canadian context to do this theory of change, to apply innovation for food system transformation. And out of it, and me and my colleagues are happy to share with the final report that's now out. We have a couple of hard copies and can direct you to a website. We've got a sort of a 4-point plan. Point 1, well, heavens, we need to have mechanisms to allow entrepreneurs and innovators, whether they're commercial or social, I'm not going to take sides on that, whether scale and bring their ideas into society. Point 2, we need to do a better job of training the next generation, not just to be great farmers and fishers and scientists, but also to be system thinkers. We've heard a lot about that today. Point 3, we need to encourage capital to flow into this space. And point 4, we need to be using the tools of the frontiers of science, artificial intelligence and genomics and all those things, and we need to get them more applied into the food system. Now you may be sitting there and thinking, well, I've heard all of those 4 strategies repeatedly, again and again. Those aren't particularly revelatory. And that's exactly the point. It's not like food systems transformation is requiring us to fly off to Mars and build a new community up there. I've done that. I've written a book about that. It's really going to be hard to do that. I wouldn't bet on that one. It's not like for food system transformation we need cold fusion in a bottle. It's just pedestrian. It's going to take effort, but it's pedestrian, normal, sort of everyday things that will affect food system transformation. And that very sort of banal nature of our strategies is what gives me hope. So as I wrap up and bring Danny back on stage in just a second, my call to action is to think how us as food system leaders in our respective roles in our respective institutions, how can we unblock or remove the obstacles that the innovator and the entrepreneur, again, commercial or social, I don't care, how can we unblock their pathways to success? Because that's the theory of change which I think we should bet on. And if we don't, to bring this full circle back to my very depressing experience this summer writing this briefing note on Gaza and the Sudan, if we don't, the consequences of failing at this job will be felt for very many years to come. Thank you, and Danny, come on back.
Bigger applause for Evan, please. Everyone stay seated, you do not move, okay? I'm looking at each and every one of you. We have a delicious lunch, and I don't want you to miss it, and I want to thank Great Performances again for providing that. Evan, what an incredible day so far, right?
Woo.
This has been great. Congratulations.
Congratulations, too.
I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit more on what you heard. You talked about the systems thinking. What were some of the highlights today for you?
Well, bullshit bingo.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of 5 exhausting, over-socialized days where my extrovert juice has been completely used up and I just need to curl into a ball on the airplane in a few hours. Yeah, I mean, I'm filled with that, duality of optimism and pessimism.
Yeah.
And I'm so inspired by a lot of what we've heard, and we have to have our bullshit attenuators out.
Yeah, those detectors need to be there.
Because it's crucial, and it's incumbent on us to call the BS out and to work on the pathways of real change.
And there's just no time for it anymore. I'm sick of it. I mean, maybe it was fun for a few years, bullshit, but I'm tired of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've got big conference fatigue. I think we all do, and we need to rapidly, existentially move beyond talk and into action. And it's happening, and we're moving a giant set of systems. So I'm not pessimistic, but I am getting tired.
Yeah. And that's something we all have to combat, that we don't want to burn out, literally or figuratively.
On any scale, personal or planetary,
right.
No burning out.
What I am inspired by is the youth panel. I thought that was exciting. I am excited by people like Julia Collins who are changing industry, and Rihanna and others, and Philip and, Marin with his bullshit detector. But I think what's, I think what most stands out for me is that, this is so crucial that we have to do it now. We can't wait for others. I think when I was 25, I thought someone else would do it. And now that I'm much older than that, I know that we are the ones who have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's 2 things. I mean, I'm now north of 50, and so thinking, all right, I've got hopefully a couple of good years left, but not as many as I used to. And then a couple of years ago, I started working with a group of corporates in Canada that we ultimately formed a new organization called the Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agri-Food. And we've been working on this for about 3 years. And at the time, as I recall, there were still 7 harvests left before we hit our 2030 targets. And now, well, I mean, we're down to 5, really. And I mean, progress has been made, but it's directionally okay. But not the tempo that we need. And I'm not saying anything that anybody in this room doesn't know about, but I feel that countdown to 2030 viscerally. It literally keeps me awake at night. And throwing my personal shoulder to the wheel for the last 25 years, I don't know, how much do I have to show for it? It hurts.
Oh, so much, Evan. No, you have
You're
so
being
much.
very generous.
No, you do. I mean, otherwise, Food Tank wouldn't work with you or know who you are. You've
There we
done
go.
so much. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you.
I love. No, I mean honestly, and I love that you mentioned tempo. That's like such a creative way to look at this. The tempo of the momentum we need to create. I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. It's been a long week. But I think that's great, and it gives me such encouragement. I want to talk about collaboration because that's been a theme throughout the day. How do we encourage more of that? This cross collaboration, the silo breaking, that knocking down these walls, talking and listening to youth, listening to those with lived experience, getting farmers' input, getting them at the table, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my whole career has oriented in some ways around developing multi-stakeholder collaborations, for lack of a less wonky way of saying it, building people that know and like and trust each other and, feel they can work together on a common purpose. It's hard, as everybody in this room knows, and one of the things that deeply concerns me is the way in which systemic structural barriers prevent fulsome engagement. And it's just way too easy to default to the people that I speak the same language to, that I share a gender and a racial background to, that I, in my case, share a tremendous amount of privilege with, and how to break those structural things down to give space to a truly fulsome and diverse set of perspectives, which means that those in power have to cede ground to those not in power traditionally, and we need to be creating very, very deliberate structures that provide funding for equity-seeking and equity-deserving groups to attend expensive events and things like that. And we need to be providing legal advice to racialized NGOs to be able to talk in the right language to the corporate sector. And that's hard.
Yep.
And I can say it rolls off the tongue, but it's hard.
It's hard, but it's needed, it's difficult, but we have to be intentional. And we have to be deliberate, and we have to keep fighting the good fight. I do want you to leave this audience. You're kind of being a downer, Evan.
I know,
I want
I'm sorry.
I want you to leave this audience with what what we can look forward to. So we have, and I'm not just talking about COP29 and COP30 and whatever. Like, what are the things that within your research you talked about, what you're seeing across the globe? What are the things that we that give you hope every day? Because honestly, you wouldn't be able to get up and keep doing this work every day if you didn't have these nuggets that were just inspiring you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, maybe this isn't an uplifting way of describing it, but in 2018 and 19, I worked on a book called Uncertain Harvest, which was all about policy and how we had to get the right levers of policy pointed in the right direction to affect change. And then during COVID, my best friend Lenore Newman and I started imagining, well, if Elon Musk gets to Mars, what's he going to eat? And this was totally a COVID project. And we wrote another book called Dinner on Mars, where we tried to thought experiment the idea of what it would take to build a Martian colony, which was a perfect thing to do in the summer of 2020 and into the winter of 2021. And both books are out. I think I've got a couple copies of Dinner on Mars in my backpack, which I don't want to take back to Canada, so I think I've got 2 sitting in my bag, so if anyone's interested, I can give it to you. Well, the depressing part about that was that between writing those 2 books, one that the research was done in 2018-19 and one the research was done 2021-20, we had fallen behind on so many key indicators. But, and this is where I'd sort of started changing my tune, the technological advances were significant. Vertical farming was becoming viable. Another topic which I get really excited about, but also critical of, is alternative sources of protein, not as a replacement to livestock, but as a part of the protein portfolio that we're going to need to embrace. And I got convinced, perhaps because Lenore is super techno-optimistic, my writing partner, I got convinced that there are phenomenal new ways of doing things which break the old assumptions apart. Like Gary, the lettuce entrepreneur, who is now talking to sell his lettuce into California supermarkets, which is a stunning reversal that we may have fresh, healthy lettuce moving from the interior of British Columbia to California.
Yeah, I love it.
Who could have done that? Even imagine that 3 or 4 years ago. So what gives me hope isn't just the technology, but the technology plus the governance, plus the engagement and the participation and the transparency. That together means we don't have to have a repeat of the past. We can do things moving forward. And that deep dive that me and my friends at the Arrell Food Institute did in terms of those 4 very pedestrian strategies, it's not rocket science. We can do this. we just have to choose to.
Right. It's like breaking bad habits. You can do it. I personally hope Elon goes to Mars. I am happy to continue this work on Earth.
It won't be tasty.
It won't be tasty. Earth is delicious. Let's stay here. Let's keep doing this hard work. Please thank Evan Fraser and the Arrell Food Institute. He's been amazing.